Hi again, Deacon Rollie back with you. I hope so far the course has gone well and that these little chats we're having are informative for you. We're in a different place today. We're here at St. Augustine's Parish in Panoka. Actually quite a beautiful little country church. We have this beautiful altar here, a beautiful sanctuary. And I thought that given that we're talking about a very, very special thing today, the sacrament of marriage, matrimony, what better place would there be than to be in the presence of God, to be here in His church, here on the altar where many weddings have happened, taken place in the presence of God. So let's talk a little bit about the sacrament of marriage and God's intention here for that sacrament. I know you've read, no doubt, the story of creation, the first book of Genesis, where God made man and woman. And He made them in His image and His likeness. And He created them, and He knew what He had created was good. And in the words of Scripture, He said, a man will leave his mother and father and join with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So there we have, right in the Old Testament, kind of the origin of coupledness, that origin of unity of man and woman. If we move along into the New Testament, we see a very beautiful story, the story of the wedding feast of Cana. Jesus goes to the wedding feast. His mother is also there. And we hear of the first miracle where Mary goes to Jesus trying to save her friends, her good neighbors' embarrassment because they've run out of wine. She implores Jesus to help them. And as you know, she asks Jesus if He will make more wine. Wow, what a great miracle that is. Wouldn't we love to take Jesus to a party with us if we ran out of wine or whatever? Jesus, make some more for us. That's kind of what it was like at Cana, except the request comes from His mother. And as yet, Jesus hasn't performed a miracle. And He tells her that, my time hasn't come. And Mary, not listening to Jesus at all, turns to the servants and says, do whatever He tells you. So she expects this miracle to happen. And He does. And He changes the water into wine. And a lot of it. 6 jugs, each 25 gallons. There's 150 gallons of wine. Can you imagine what a celebration that this would have been? The point, though, is it is Jesus' first miracle. And the first miracle happens at a wedding feast. So there is a very beautiful, beautiful connection here in how Jesus sanctifies this whole sacrament by making it his coming of age, so to speak, His entry into the world through a wedding feast. There's a very beautiful thing that happens in marriage, and sometimes we miss that point, that God, who created man and woman, now allows us to share in that creation with Him. We call it procreation, but the ability for a man and a woman themselves to conceive and have children. What a beautiful gift that is. And a gift, that is just totally given to us by God. And I can't think of anything more beautiful. I do want to say this. There's sometimes when we talk about marriage, sometimes we forget it's only one of the vocations that God calls us to. So married life is there, and many people choose it. But let's remember, there's a vocation in being single. And being single calls us to, share exactly the life that Jesus Himself chose, because Jesus Himself never married. And He saw His role in His singleness to be connected so totally to the Father, to do the will of the Father. And I don't want to leave you with the impression that the married vocation is the only one. Those who choose singleness are also following Jesus' path. So I'm going to stop there for now, and we will come back in a short while to continue this discussion of matrimony. Hi, Deacon Rollie back again. So welcome to the second section on marriage. And in this section, I want to invite you to look at ways that we prepare ourselves for marriage. You know, it strikes me that we spend so much time preparing ourselves for so many other things. High school graduation might be one of those things, that we prepare for. We spend, a lot of hours looking for dresses and suits and planning, how we're going to get there and what we're going to do. And we spend a lot of time preparing for careers, too. We graduate from high school, something in mind. We start looking at colleges and universities, post-secondary, apprenticeship, whatever. And then we invest all those years into that career. And that's good. All of that is good, and we need to do that. The point I'm trying to make is, if we invested that much time and energy into thinking about marriage, thinking about what we want in a spouse, what we want that to be in our life, maybe marriage and marriages would be more successful. Maybe they would be more long-term. Maybe there would be that strong commitment. And so let's talk a little bit about how we do that and how we prepare for it. The Catholic Church says you must have a marriage preparation course before they're going to marry you. And actually, many of the other churches are doing exactly the same thing. So you just can't walk in and say to the priest, we want to get married. Can you do it next Saturday? It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in most Christian faiths. And so the preparation for marriage is more of a long-term view that we have to take. And I'm going to suggest to you that view has to begin even now, even as you're in high school, as you're pondering your future. How do we do that? Well, most of you probably by this time have maybe experienced dating or are getting yourself ready to date. Why do we date? We date, to meet people. We date to try ourselves on, try our personality on with another person. We want to be accepted. We want to be loved. We want to have intimacy with someone. And so dating is kind of that testing ground to see how's that going to work. Well, I'm going to suggest to you that dating is really where we're beginning that preparation for that journey in life, which might eventually lead us to commit ourselves faithfully to one person. I'm going to tell you a little story, and it might make this maybe a little more relevant to you. I want you to remember, I'm a deacon. I'm not a priest. So when I tell you about my children, deacons get married. And I am married, and I have 4 children. And my youngest daughter, is a beautiful girl, very, very attractive, tall girl, quite athletic. I always worried about her because she was busy. She dated in high school and seemed to have lots of fun. But as she graduated from high school, she met a fella, and he struck me as a pretty genuine young man. As fathers, you always have a little bit of a concern, but I didn't find this out till long after they had dated. And in fact, I'll tell you the end of the story. They got married. But I want to tell you about the courtship, because I think it's an interesting story. She was quite taken up with this young fella, and they would do lots of things. They would, build snowmen. They would go off on walks. They would whatever happens on dates, but lots of activity in their life. But there was a faith component there, and they were both Catholic. I think that kind of helped. But the story that I want to tell you is this: that during all of that time that they were dating, he would not allow himself to kiss her. Not that she didn't want to kiss him. She wanted to kiss him, right? But sometimes they'd be watching a movie and he might have had his arm around her and, she, was feeling, very intimate and she'd want to give him a peck on the cheek or whatever. I'm not saying that didn't happen, but, the lip-on-lip kind of kiss, he didn't let it happen. When she told me the story, I thought, wow, that's something. Because usually it's the girl who has to kind of take that stand and maybe sort of push the boy off. But here was a young man ready to take on that responsibility to say, this girl's important to me. I want her to know how important she is. I want her to know I'm prepared to give up some things that are important to me. Do I want to kiss her? Absolutely. You know what I'd like to do a little more? Absolutely. But he had already positioned himself and his life and his stance to say, help me, God, help me be strong here. This girl's important to me, and I'm going to communicate that to her. Now, maybe some other girls would have walked away from that relationship. My daughter didn't. And eventually, this young man came to me and asked for her hand in marriage, which, again, I thought was pretty novel, because that doesn't always happen in this day and age. But it tells you something about who he was. And today, they're married. They have 2 children. God's blessed them. He just finished his first degree in kinesiology, just got accepted into physiotherapy. She has a good job, has a degree. Their life is blossoming, and I know that God's at the center of that. I'm telling you that story because I think when we date or court, we need to know who we are. We need to know what we stand for, what we believe in. We need to know the strength of ourselves, and if we think we're a little bit weak, then let's make sure we're dating with another couple. Let's make sure we're dating, with friends. Let's make sure we're in places, that are public, that we're not going to allow ourselves those indiscretions that could lead us to moments of infidelity, of unchaste actions, and so on. So hard to do that. I know it's so hard to do that in a culture where we're bombarded with all of these images. You can't turn on the TV without seeing 2 people, in bed together. And there's an expectation that, I guess this is how life is. This is what people do. No, it's not what people do. It's what TV does. It's what Hollywood does. God's calling us to something just a little better than that, a little greater than that. He's calling us to holiness in our lives as single people, as dating couples, as engaged couples. He's calling us to live our life in holiness. I'm saying that, and I'm just guessing that there's some of you maybe who have already had sex, and you're saying, I'm done, I'm finished, I've lost my virginity, so what else have I got to lose? And so we sort of keep tumbling into that spiral of a life that maybe we're not happy about. Let me say this to you, that chastity, if you've lost your virginity, reclaim your chastity. Reclaim it. Because chastity is not the result of one single action. Chastity is the way we choose to live our life, and the way we choose to follow God. Reclaim it. Reclaim it. And begin to focus again on what it is that God is calling you to be. Okay, I'm going to just move on from that just a moment here, because as we prepare for marriage, we need to think about what that might look like. What's that ceremony going to look like? Where is it going to happen? I've been invited many times to do weddings in the backyard, to do weddings at a farm, to do weddings in a mountain setting. And in every one of those requests, I've had to say no, because the church holds firm that we want to have couples sanctify their marriage in a church before God. It's a beautiful thing, really, to come into the presence of God. Not that God isn't there in nature, that God might not be there on top of a mountain, but we know God for sure is here in the church. And this is his presence among men, and to be married, here, I think is a very, very special thing. I don't want to criticize those who have gone elsewhere. All I'm saying is, think about this now before, those other ideas start coming into your head. What a beautiful place to come to. You come down the aisle, you're here before God, before the witnesses that you've invited. Rain or shine, you're going to be sheltered because the church is, covered, and so nothing is going to interfere with that day. Also remember, in your planning, Jesus is there between the two of you. Jesus is that center that brings you and your spouse together. And if your marriage is always centered around Jesus in prayer, faithfulness to one another, fidelity to one another, the blessings and rewards are just going to multiply in your life. So it's not just the wedding ceremony, it's not just the dress, it's not just the guests on the list and so on. It's when you stand before God as husband and wife, that's marriage. Don't forget to invite Jesus to the wedding. Hi, welcome back. Deacon Rollie here again. We're beginning section 3 of our marriage unit, and this one here will be on broken relationships. We know that even the best laid plans of men sometimes go astray, and there's those there's those issues that happen in life that can... Hi, welcome back. Deacon Rollie here again. This is part 3 of the marriage section, the marriage unit. And in this section, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we might consider to be broken relationships and how that affects marriages and families, children. Where's the church stand on these things? And is there healing? Can we seek some kind of peace out of all of this? Well, we know life isn't always perfect, that things happen. And certainly the church realizes that as well. And so how do we deal with relationships that have broken off with those kinds of problems? Sometimes, especially in situations of abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual, it may be beneficial for that couple to be apart for a bit, to kind of work things out. We would call that separation. So they separate from each other, maybe with the time to examine their own lives, see, am I the person God wants me to be? Am I treating my spouse the way I should be treating her or him? Am I unselfish? Am I generous in my nature? All of those things. And sometimes that period of separation may be enough to say, yeah, I know where I messed up. I want to try this again. I want to try it again in a loving, caring way to see if I can give my spouse that intimacy and that love that they deserve. As you know, it doesn't always happen that way, and the church recognizes that too. So they put in place some really good programs for couples that struggle, couples that need help. One of those is called retrouvailles, sort of a French word, sort of like, let's do this again, let's try this again. It's quite intense. It's a whole weekend to begin with, and then it's a follow-up of 6 or 8 weeks where every Sunday you check in again with your leaders, with your team, and you talk about how it's going and about some of the issues that you're working on, and there is support in that journey. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing, and many couples have found that their whole marriage is just renewed because they've tried a little harder and they've gone at it together. Does that always work? No. But the success rate for those who have gone in there seeking that remediation and wanting it, is very high. Often, though, couples get so estranged that they don't even want to try. And as a result, they seek a divorce, they seek a split, a separation. So civilly, a divorce is a civil act. Apply for it, and they, get a civil permanent divorce from one another. That doesn't suggest, though, that the church has let go of that union. The church still sees that union as a man and a woman together, even though they have a divorce. Now, albeit the church will not go to the next step, which is annulments, unless that couple is civilly divorced. So that's the first step. If someone's seeking an annulment, of course, they have to have that civil divorce in place. Well, what is an annulment, and why is it sort of unique within the Catholic Church? If we go back to our first talk about marriage, where God said, "I've made man and woman, the two shall become one." The Church is pretty serious about that. And for those two not to become one, it does require a lot of study, a lot of introspection, a lot of testimony on behalf of both spouses. They sometimes even go to those who were there to witness the marriage. They would talk to the parents of both spouses. They would look at all the factors involved in the life of that couple. So it's quite intense, really intense. And once all that information has been gathered, it goes before a tribunal, which is made up of a collection of people, but for sure representatives of the Chancery Office, which would be where the center of the diocese would be. In our case here in the Red Deer area, it's the Archdiocese of Edmonton. So those recommendations or applications that are being made for annulment would go there, would appear before a tribunal once all this information is collected. What does an annulment do? Well, during that process, that collection of information and all of that data, the church asks that couple to remain faithful, to have this fidelity, and I guess we would say chastity. In other words, they don't want them to enter into other relationships, particularly relationships that might lead to a second marriage and so on, because the church wants all of us to remain in sacramental grace, the ability to receive the sacraments, to come to Holy Communion, to live in that period of time, in union with God and asking the grace of God to help them in where their life is going. And so a divorced person seeking an annulment wants to do this because their hope ultimately is that they would be able to remarry again in the church and remain in the sacramental graces of the church. So it's a process that often begins very soon after divorce, so that if couples do meet, or a person does meet, another individual, and they want to get married, that the annulment process is well on their way or has been completed. There is a lot of information in the Catechism of the Catholic Church on some of those topics. First of all, on separation, on divorce, on annulments. And it would be good to look at that section. That whole section on marriage is pretty enriching and would probably add a lot to your knowledge about marriage, as well as some of these other factors that come into play. Let's shift gears again just a little bit, because before we complete this unit, I think it would be important to talk about some of those issues that, again, are topics of concern. And I'm kind of looking at issues of contraception, family planning, so on. We live in this culture of, I would call a mentality of contraception, where without informing our conscience, we sometimes think, well, no problem, we don't want kids right away, we want to get our careers set, we want to buy a house, we'd like to finish paying for the car, We have all these reasons that we put in front of us for not having children. And thus we think, well, contraception's okay because it fits right into our lifestyle. Well, the church takes a little different view of that. We want to get away from this contraceptive mentality into opening ourselves up to the possibility of conceiving a child. But the church is there to support families, not to dictate to families, but they want to do it in a way that we're in harmony with God and God's plan for our own bodies and God's plan for creation. And so the church is saying that unnatural means of contraception are placing a barrier there that prevents the true intimacy of the conjugal act to happen. Because, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, it's a moment of passion, well, let's just, the husband comes home from maybe hockey game or something. He's had a few drinks with the guys. He comes home and his wife's sitting there, and he's just wants to make love to her, and for him this is the right time. But maybe it's not for her. If they're contracepting, they probably have sex. They're not making love to one another. They're not making this intimate, caring, concerned act of love. It becomes a physical act, and one that actually can break that relationship down over time. What is the conjugal act? It's an act of love. It's an act of intimacy between two couples. It's knowing one another's bodies. It's knowing one another's feelings. It's caring about where that other person is. And true love is really the awakening of that desire in your spouse, of wanting fulfillment for that spouse, where together you are so united in that act that you're just reading each other in a complete, unselfish kind of giving. When we're contracepting, it's very difficult to sort of put aside our sexual instinct and to want that fulfillment just for ourselves. And we forget there's another person in that whole equation. So what does the church say about this? The church has offered and has blessed, I would say, what we would call natural family planning. And again, without getting into many details, I'm going to encourage you to explore that, to learn a little bit more about it. And there's many different ways of and descriptions of family planning, but it has come so far, and we know so much about the human body, that couples actually use natural family planning to help them conceive if they're having difficulty conceiving children. Or to not conceive, that means abstinence in those times where the woman would be most fertile. Does it bring blessings to that family? Well, it certainly connects the husband and wife together. The husband knows the woman's cycle. She's aware of her own sort of biology and what's happening to her. There's an intimacy and a sharing of all of that whole relationship. And so sometimes you say no to one another, or you say no to yourself because the time isn't right. Is there other ways to show love to your spouse other than sexual intercourse? Absolutely. And, abstaining is probably one of those ways where you share, in other ways in intimacy that couples can share in their relationship with one another. So I'm going to stop there and invite you to once again look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It covers most of these topics quite well. Good luck with that.